Hi guys, today's topic is all about macronutrients, and we're going to focus on the ratio of carbohydrate, proteins, and fats. So, for those of you who aren't sure what macronutrients are, as I've said, they're carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So they're the main bulk of our calories. That's what the majority of our calories come in the form of those three macronutrients. Um, and um, we're going to talk about each of them individually, but specifically, what we're going to focus on today is getting the balance right of having the right amount of carbohydrate, the right amount of protein, and the right amount of fat. So, if we was to look at, say, for example, different meal examples, like for example breakfast versus lunch versus an evening meal. Evening meals for most people tend to be fairly balanced. They've got some form of protein, they've got a good source of say carbohydrates, some healthy fats in there. So they might have, let's say, for example, a stir fry, which has got lots of green veg in there, which is your sort of form of carbohydrate, low GI, non-starchy carbs. You might have some rice in there, so a little bit of starch in there as well. You might have, say, chicken in there, which is your form of protein, or you could have salmon, which is protein plus healthy fats. So generally, evening meals for most people tend to be fairly sort of well balanced, but for a lot of people, breakfast time is the one meal that really sort of suffers. Oftentimes, most people's breakfast is completely unbalanced. They're oftentimes having way too much carbohydrate in that one meal. So, for example, oftentimes what people have for breakfast would be a cereal like cornflakes or Rice Krispies, or something along those lines, or they might have toast with jam on it. So that one meal is not very well balanced. It's very low in protein, very low in healthy fats, and high in carbohydrates, and oftentimes the wrong types of carbohydrates. Oftentimes it's your starchy carbs, so that have got a lot of calories to them, but not a lot of nutrients within it. So what we want to do is sort of try and focus on fine tuning our diets, working out what's the right balance for us at each meal. This example here, you can see that depending on where you evolve, where your physiology sort of evolved on the planet, there you can see that if you grew up in extremely cold climates, you probably would be better suited to a higher protein diet. If you grew up in much warmer climates closer to the equator, you'd probably be more suited to a carbohydrate or higher plant-based sort of diet. And then sort of in between the two, as you can see, you fall into what's called as like a mixed category, where you need sort of 50-50 balance of the two, really. And as I say, everyone's different. We all have different body chemistries. We're all slightly different. So it's important that we don't just do what our friends doing or what works for someone else. If we're not feeling right, it's really important that we're keeping a food diary, keeping a log of what we're doing on a daily basis, what time we're eating foods, what foods we're eating, including liquids, but then also recording down how we're feeling throughout the day. So are we feeling energized? How good are we sleeping? How good's our concentration? Factors like that, our bowel movements, bloating, all these different symptoms we can be monitoring on a daily basis, and then that sort of information gives us an idea as to are the foods that we're eating working for us. Because as I say, some of us might be better suited to more of a carb type diet or a higher plant-based diet. Some of us might be more suited to a higher animal-based diet, get a higher protein sort of diet. So we need to, as I say, look at fine tuning our diet, not just going along with what someone tells us to do. Our bodies are going to feed back to us. You know, if we're constantly ill, if we're constantly struggling for energy and things like that, chances are we're eating the wrong types of foods for us. Um, so, you know, someone might think that eating lots of fruit is great. It's, you know, and fruit obviously has got some good health properties to it. But for some people, having too much fruit, it's going to swing them in the wrong direction, especially if they're more of a protein type. So it is important that we, as I say, monitor these things and tweak it as we go along. Likewise, if we're struggling to lose weight or inches, it could be that we're getting our balances wrong. But as I say, we can only really work that out through trial and error, really, trialing a specific ratio of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and then working from there. So as you can see on this diagram here, you know, as I say, you could look at each meal and say, right, okay, in this specific meal I've had 47% of that meal's been carbohydrate based, another 27% has been protein, and then the other 26% was fats. So obviously we want to try and make sure what type of carbohydrate it is that we're eating. So, you know, as we've said, you've got starchy carbs and high GI carbs, and then you've got non-starchy and low GI carbs. So for most people, they need to be eating way more of the nutrient-dense, low GI non-starchy carbs, having a lot more of that in their diet, and a smaller percentage. So we could break that up into two categories, if you like, starches versus non-starchy carbs. It's okay to have some starches, obviously we need them, but again, it differs for everybody as to what they can tolerate and what works best for them. And by keeping a food diary and tracking that information, that's how's best to identify what if what you're doing is working for you. Proteins, as we know, there's good proteins, there's bad proteins. Some people feel better off more plant-based proteins, you know, nuts, seeds, beans, pulses, all those sorts of things. Others will operate better off animal-based proteins. What's really important here is that it's the quality of the protein and the fats that really matter. So if you're eating sick, unhealthy animals, then that's going to have an impact on your health and how you're feeling. So obviously it's more about the quality of the protein here and the source. And then in terms of fats, you again, that might be quite a high percentage of fat for someone if they are more of a carb type person. Someone eating that amount of fat might feel pretty poor eating it. You know, they might find that they suffer with more symptoms. They're not as energized. They're not feeling as good. They're sluggish. Whereas someone with a better balance there, a lower percentage, might feel a lot better. So as I say, we've just got to understand that there is no one size fits all, and we've got to really adjust it based on how we're feeling, how we're operating. I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to sort of get through today. As always, if you're struggling and you're not sure whether the food combinations that you're eating is right for you, as always, reach out to me. If you need to, we can book some time, either after a class or a weekend, where we can catch up and we can go through your food diary in more detail. You know, not many people, not many of the members really use the food diaries as they should do, you know, filling them out and bringing them in regularly so that we can see what you're doing and tweak it week on week. Okay, so I'll look forward to hearing back from you if you've got any problems, or if you want to contact me through email or phone. That's absolutely fine. Thanks a lot.